Hey guys, how is it going? Today we want to use a few more annotations to do more tricks with CDI in your handcrafted microservice from scratch, written in Java. The first thing I want to emphasize is this application scoped annotation here. It actually is added for two things. The first thing is to actually mark the greetings factory as a CDI bean at all, because if you remember the video from last time, we have added this line, and I said this line is needed because we don't have a beans XML file just to enable CDI, because CDI is not enabled just by putting the dependency on the class path. It's enabled by the beans XML file normally. So if we don't have a beans XML file on the class path, then I added the system property as a replacement. But now let's see what it actually says. It actually is a property that is named scan implicit with the value of true. And what does scan implicit means? This is actually not enabling CDI. Well, it does, but actually it tells CDI about the scanning mode, and the scanning mode is switched to implicit. That's because we have the word true here. So this means it actually has to check the class path for what is a CDI bean and what is not. There is a rules framework. You can find it in the CDI specification what actually is treated as a CDI bean with implicit true. And part of this is that only specific annotations make your classes CDI beans. So I added the application scope to make this one a CDI bean. If I wouldn't have added this, it would be just some class, and it has no scope at all. So I added a scope, so it's a CDI bean. So so far so good. But what happens if I don't want an application scope? What I want, for example, is not another greetings factory created every time I need one, which is slightly different from application scoped. Application scoped is not a singleton. Application scoped only says create an instance and hold it for the time the application runs. That does not enforce that you have a singleton. If you want to enforce a singleton, you should write singleton. That's what it's good for. By the way, you can see here, singleton, just like inject, both live in the Jakarta inject namespace. These are not CDI specific annotations. They are general dependency injection annotations. And I know a lot of tutorials tell you always go with CDI and always go with the CDI specific annotations. Scopes are a CDI invention. That's why they live in context application scope here and not in inject. So there's a slight difference between dependency injection in general and CDI in particular. And most tutorials mix it and tell you always go with CDI, always go with explicit scoped. I actually think a bit different. I would go with the general case. And only if I need CDI, I would go with CDI. But I think that's a different discussion. So I just wanted to tell you, you should not mix it. You should always know and be aware what you're doing. So what I'm now doing is I replace a CDI annotation and add a general dependency injection annotation. And the contract for singleton is actually there is exactly one instance ever. There will never be a second instance. So in case you need singleton, go with singleton. And if we have added this one, then we have a problem because of the rule set. I told earlier there's a rule set. What is an implicit bean? It's not singleton. Singleton is not part of that set of implicit beans. So let's first remove that import. We don't need it. And if you run it now, you will see that it does not work anymore because CDI was instructed to use that rule set which says I only find application scoped and I do not find singletons. So it's hanging here. It will not go on. The reason for this is that it doesn't find any CDI information at this moment. So to fix that, now is the moment where we have to remove this one. So we switch off, sorry, there's a typo. We switch off the implicit rule set. And that means now we need a different rule set. So you could say, well, maybe the default rule set is good enough. No, unfortunately, it is not. Because if we're starting now, it will do nothing at all. Why is that the case? The case is now CDI is not even enabled. So if we want to enable CDI, if you remember the part 1 of the CDI video, then I said you have to add a file which is called beans.xml, and to enable CDI, it's enough to add this file. So you will see if we start it now, it will go some steps further. Now it enabled CDI, it found weld, it initialized weld, but it's still hanging. Why the case is that? The case is now we are in the implicit mode again. The proof that we're in the implicit mode is if we replace singleton once more by application scoped. Application scoped. Then it will start, but this is not what we want. So just to prove it is starting, right? Okay, but this is not what we want. We want singleton, so we have to explicitly tell it, don't go with the implicit mode. Enable CDI, but don't go with the implicit mode. Now you could have the idea maybe it's enough to add another property, but unfortunately that is not working. If you want to have another mode than implicit mode, then you have to provide some information in the beans.xml. So let's give it the needed information. What you see here simply is the static information that this is a valid beans.xml file. We need this one to write this one. And this is what we actually want to tell it. We want to switch the discovery mode from the default, from implicit to, for example, all. All means check all the beans. If any of that beans is eligible for CDI, use all of the beans for CDI. That might not be the right choice for all your cases, but it's working in my case and it's just for demonstration. So if we start it again, hopefully it should boot up now. Yeah, it does. because now it has a wider scope. It sees also classes having no explicit scope or no other annotation that enables CDI. And what's that other annotations? For example, we have here we have a path here. Now you would say path is not a CDI annotation. This is a JAX-RS annotation, and in an early video you told us that JAX-RS and CDI have nothing in common. They're separated things. Yes, that is the truth, but there's an exception. The JAX-RS specification defines that some annotations, for example, the path annotation, is turning your annotated class into a CDI bean. So CDI knows that and accepts this to enable CDI here, but there is no specification, none at all, saying that Singleton will turn on CDI on Greetings Factory. I know this is very confusing, but it has to do with the history and with the agreements. That there are mutual agreements between the teams that wrote JAX-RS, CDI and Jakarta EE, that there's some magic behind the scenes. There's magic example, for example, for the path annotation or for the application path annotation. But there is no such magic for Singleton. Actually, you can enable such magic, but this is way too deep inside of a specific CDI tutorial. You could write your own code to tell CDI that Singleton actually is enabling the CDI magic. For now, just to make our code, our microservice example work, it's the easier way just to switch the mode to all, so all the classes are checked for annotations and not those classes having specific CDI annotations or specific JAX-RS annotations are used to get injected. Well, that's it. But there's even more we can do with our microservice code when it comes to magic. So until next time, stay safe and as always, party on!